Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Happy to have so many people on here. So very excited to talk to you about a topic that seems to be one of the main issues in running SOCs and running cyber defense operations. It's all around the people and what is required in order to really get the right level of people. So I'd like to introduce you to two of my co-panelists that will help provide some perspectives and some answers to the questions that come up. I think as far as I understand, everybody can ask questions by putting them in the chat, and we'll try to make sure we address those as well. But I will follow a set of questions that are prepared, and hopefully it will provide you with some interesting insights. So first of all, I'd like to introduce you to Matt Brzezinski, who is the Vice President and the CISO of Infrastructure and Operations of State Auto Insurance. Matt, do you want to say quickly hello?
Hello, or good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where in the world you are. Thank you, Adrian. Glad to be here.
And Matt, where are you based?
United States, Ohio, so Columbus, Ohio.
And so you're in the morning hours, and hopefully you had your first coffee already.
Yeah, good to go.
Good. Thanks for being with us, Matt. And then I'd like to also introduce you to Adam Drabik, our CISO of Cyberproof. Adam is recovering from COVID, as we understand, so hopefully he'll be able to stay with us for the next hour. So Adam, say hi quickly.
Hello, everyone. I'm Adam Drabik. I'm based in the United Kingdom in London. So for me, it's actually the middle of the day hour, just after lunch, which helps me recover from COVID. So hopefully everything will go fine today.
Good. Thanks for joining us, Adam, and appreciate the effort of surmounting your lack of motivation of your sickness. So hopefully you'll feel better soon. So let's start with the first set of questions around the people that usually sit in a SOC and that are required for a SOC. I'd like to ask maybe Matt, who runs a SOC for quite some time. How do you find talent and how do you staff people in your SOC? What's important to you?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, especially in this day and age where the labor market in general is hurting. Everybody's looking for people to work, and especially IT and security has always been one of those areas where it's hard to find good, talented people. So the first is finding anybody, right? And then looking for the right level of talent. There's a whole list of certifications and specific technical skills that you're looking for that really is kind of a given that they would look for. And to me, it's more about the personality traits of the individual. Do they have, passionate? Are they driven? Do they have a high aptitude and really desire to continue learning is what I look for in that process to try to get people up, because, you're going to learn one technology today, whether it's call it an antivirus product or endpoint detection and response product, but 2 years later, that's going to change. So you always have to be willing to and able to adapt to new technology and learn and understand it. So those are some of the key things that I'm always looking for and trying to train up within our teams.
Okay, thanks for that insight. And so Adam, you've been around the block a number of years, and you've seen different successful and less successful SOC operations. What do you think is really key as far as the strengths and the background that's required for some of these SOC analysts and SOC leaders?
So interestingly, while the perception, I guess, out there is that everyone in Security Operations Center has to be the in-depth technical specialist, I believe in actually in having the strength coming out of the variety of experience, I guess, and variety of backgrounds. So while you may actually have some specialists in particular technology, quite often you would also benefit from people who specialize, for example, in human behavior as well, to have that as part of the team and to have that kind of fairly wide and broad experience and knowledge with your team. So I think part of the strength of modern SOC derives from that, I guess, diversity of experience that you need to hire into your security team to reflect the current challenges that we have in cybersecurity, which are not just in technological kind of security and deep technical security, but also in human behavior, also making errors and so on, and how to combat those, or how to prevent those, or generally how to manage the consequences, or how to reduce the negative consequences to the companies, and obviously provide that much better level of the resilience that we historically had or didn't have, right? So that's my kind of take on probably more and less successful teams and experience over my last 25 years in the industry.
Thanks, Adam. So just for everybody's knowledge, Howard mentioned at the beginning the agenda. We will have an additional session at the end of today's SOC Masterclass that will specifically address the issues about retention and motivation of SOC teams, where Mayan and Hen, who runs our SOC operation, will talk a little bit more into details on what is important about the motivational aspect. So if this topic is of interest to you, you feel free to join us at the end of today's session. So as we also said, we will do a certain number of polls during the sessions. And I would like to ask Lori to launch our first poll, which is a question around what are the main challenges in staffing your SOC operations? So is it finding talents? Is it keeping resources? Is it training resources? Or is it motivating resources? So I'll give you 10, 15 seconds to fill in the first poll. So I'll let you do that. I guess we probably can move on. So I'll let you do the poll, finish the poll, and we'll see. So interesting. The biggest challenge is finding the talent. So this is a scarce market for talent, and then keeping them is right behind. So that's definitely a big issue. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Training and motivating comes right afterwards. So I think this is probably something that everybody goes through when they staff any sort of operation, is first finding the right people, keeping them, and then making sure that they stay. So thanks for participating. So let's go a little bit into that aspect on how to actually motivate and train the resources. So back to you, Matt. What do you do in order to motivate the people that you found?
Yeah, right. I mean, people are so key, right? And, I really like Adam's point earlier about the diversity of thought and getting them on a team so that you have that group of people. And, motivation is key, right? With a lot of opportunities out there for people to leave if they see something better. And really, my thought process around it, and as a company, is what we do is we train you and treat you in such a way that it's easy for you to leave, but we want you to stay because you're treated so well, right? So it's, hey, I'm going to offer you all these training opportunities and these courses. I'm going to help you build your personal career and invest in you as an individual, with the full expectation that, I could position you really well for another opportunity, but to make sure that, you recognize that, wow, they are treating me really well, that I'm not going to get that anywhere else. And I do want to stay here and continue to grow in that role. So again, I educate them and train them enough so that it's quite easy for them to leave, but that hopefully inspires a sense of loyalty and desire to stay. And even if they do leave, right, you're building your network out there. So they'll go somewhere else and be like, wow, I had an amazing experience here. Because let's face it, not every company, you won't always have a position available if somebody's ready to move on, right? If they're ready to be a SOC lead, and you already have somebody in that position and they have that opportunity somewhere else, they're going to go for their own personal growth. Or if they're ready to be a CISO, right? There's only so many per organization. But when you train those people and treat them in such a way that they spread your network out and say, hey, you know what? I wish I had an opportunity here, but I don't. But now that he's over at a new company, they say, hey, continue to expand it and build a reputation for not only yourself, but also for your company, so that people then want to come there and work with you. So.
Thanks, Matt. So along the same lines, how long does it take for somebody that you might find on the open market to really become operationally efficient and carrying his loads or her loads? And how do you see that with the experience level from the different categories of analysts, from simplistic, like a level 1 that does the first level of analysis, and then going to a much further level of investigation capabilities with a level 2? So how long do you see the investment required in order to get the people to the level that are really providing the value for you?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. I think the answer is, it depends, right, on your specific environment, and it also depends on the skill set of the individual that you're hiring in. As we all know, it's difficult to find new talent, and so some of the talent that you're bringing in is just greenfield talent. And what I say by that is we're looking at college apprentices and interns that are just starting their degree program, that have an interest and have the most base level foundational stuff to bring them up to speed. At a SOC level 1, you're probably looking at 90 days for that, just that tier 1 kind of monitoring and following the built-in incident response book and procedures for alerts. And then depending upon their experience level to get to that SOC 2 or SOC level 2 for that. I wanted to say SOC 2 type 2 because it's on my brain, but now level 2, it could be a year or 2 or more, depending upon their skill set that you're hiring in. And for us, though, to find that talent, again, people have said it's hard to find resources. And what we've been focused on is going to the very beginning of the value chain. And if we get lucky, we find someone that's mid-career. But for the most part, it's like finding fresh people just in college or just started college that are interested, and start them at that ground level.
So I take it that you try to put your focus on getting the talent where you can find them, which means out of the school, rather than trying to staff it with people that might be already on the market, and then grow them with putting the right level of training and expertise around them, so that you can grow them to somebody that becomes really efficient for your environment, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So Adam, you're at the pinnacle of the career path of a security expert. You're a CISO. You went through various stages. I actually don't know if you ever worked in a SOC, but maybe you did. So what do you think is important for these guys to learn? What sort of skills do they require in order to grow in their tasks and in their responsibilities?
So yes, indeed, I have gone through pretty much all levels of security career. Anything from security engineering through, analysis to, through leadership, low-level leadership roles to the most senior leadership roles. So I've been through pretty much all the hoops. But obviously, that was 20 and 25 years ago, maybe even more. The world.
You're not that old, Adam. You're not that old.
I made, I'm certainly young by nature, I guess, not necessarily by looks. But anyway, so I think the challenge is that we have a very fast moving technology and kind of environment. When I started, it was kind of at the beginning of the days of internet and wide connectivity and everything else. And obviously the skills there have been more acquired as a and that kind of progression through ranks and development has mostly been made through effectively self-study and kind of the general discovery. Obviously now we have all sorts of help and tools in how we can how we can get people there much quicker than in the old days, right? When you had to kind of rediscover everything yourself. So I feel that one of the best ways of actually, getting there is to pairing the juniors with seniors and kind of have an on the job guidance and training. That helps enormously, right? And that also helps people to have that kind of buddy or mentors, technical and behavioral mentors, I think, in their work, someone to look up to and role models. And this is something that we, for example, had very little, so long ago, right? Now it's more possible. The other aspects that I wanted to come back to, and in relation to what Matt said earlier, I think apart from the graduates, I think it's actually worth looking at your own organization and existing talent, not necessarily within cybersecurity, but in general IT, where you can actually promote people who have been doing certain tasks or roles, where you can actually port them into cybersecurity. I mean, people from help desk, people from second line of general IT support. There is a lot of talent there, and those people may actually want to continue their careers, just not necessarily in general IT, but more kind of direct their attention and expertise in cybersecurity. I think it's a very powerful source of talent as well. So it's not just trying to get that talent, I guess, out of universities, but also, I guess, it makes sense to provide the career options also for your people internally. And equally, provide your SOC talents ability to go back to general IT to manage other operations. And I mean, how useful it is to have IT managers who actually understand, are deep down actually security experts. That would help a lot with general resilience of our operations.
Okay, thanks for that insight, Adam. So let's move a little bit into the actual processes and the way to measure how well tuned an operation actually is. So as part of a competitive environment, creating ways to measure the performance of the individuals helps sometimes, and sometimes it actually creates maybe blockage. So the question to you, Matt, do you measure the performance of your analysts today? And if yes, what are kind of like the criterias for you to measure them, and what do you do with that information?
Absolutely. I think measurements and KPIs are an incredibly vital piece of any organization, not only for your department, but also for individuals, where appropriate. It's obviously just one measure point for them, because there's other intangibles that you're not going to have a specific hard measure on. At least not all the time, right? But if you're looking for, some basic ones, it's what's your MTR, mean time to respond, right? For any sort of alert or action that comes through on the SOC when those analysts are on target, right? So, response in under, depending upon the organization, between 5 and 15 minutes, lower the better, of course. And then depending upon the alert. We also put in, like surveys. We'll do like feedback surveys at a customer service level, especially if the SOC is interfacing for their particular role, interfacing with our customers, internal customers, that is, because it's not just about how fast they respond and how well they respond. If they seem not super friendly to a internal customer for a phishing email, or rude or something else, there's a different level of customer service that also is I feel required and for any IT person, because you're always dealing with people. It's a nice thing to have. So that is, we are measured on that. We also do like knowledge quizzes and kind of internal team competitions. A little bit of gamification can be fun on occasion, just to keep things different and the team excited.
So I know, Matt, you're outsourcing part of your SOC to a service provider. I'm not going to mention the name, but we probably can figure out who it is. How do you deal with that? Does that service provider provide you with those tools so that you can actually measure the way that they're operating?
Absolutely. Those are reported in monthly and quarterly metrics that are out for our analysis for that external piece, and then our own internal. We look at other metrics for it, and I think that external SOC. I think there might be a separate topic on it later in the day, but I think it's a good call out. For any organization to evaluate their own capabilities and realize what they're in the business of doing. Anybody can put together a well and world-class SOC, but it's more a question of, is that your competitive advantage as a business? And do you really want to focus all your efforts on it? Or do you even have the funding to do it, as opposed to working with some trusted partner that can come in and has this kind of down pat, comes in with a playbook, is able to really get up and running, and to take that particular burden off your shoulders with limited resources and focus. So.
Okay, thanks. So Adam, on your side, you're being the CISO, trying to make sure that we are up to par with what the industry does. How much do you actually compare the SOC operations to industry benchmarks? Do you get that sort of information, or is that hard to get? And if you do get it, what sort of information have you been able to find out?
So I think historically, that's a very interesting conversation about security in general, not just SOC performance, especially at the board level, because very often the boards would be interested in how well the organization kind of stacks up against its competition within industry and what have you. And obviously, no one wants to be the trailing bit. Also, not many organizations want to be the actual leader. Now, on that note, I guess being a CISO of a cybersecurity organization is very refreshing, because here it is, the organization that absolutely wants to be the leader and drives towards being a leader and the market's top organization in all those services. So it's a kind of an interesting discussion of how you measure. I find the kind of, again, historical measures being very performance oriented, but performance of SOC, as in how many people you have and how much work they do, but less orientation on the actual other measurement or other key indicator, which is KRI, key risk indicator. So this is effectively measuring or sensing of how much risk the organization is exposed to. And I think the success of SOC effectively lowers those measures in KRIs to actually demonstrate its effectiveness. That's historically been very difficult to achieve. Nowadays, we have a lot more analysts and a lot more comparison publishings from the likes of big analyst organizations or Big Four, doing research in that specific topic. So I think we actually are now tooled with things where we can actually demonstrate to our top leaders or our corporate sponsors, how much effect and how, where do we need to drive our organizations and the development in that. So I think it's useful to have that. But on the other hand, every organization has to do what's right for that particular organization. And it's usually very unique circumstances. So no two organizations are completely alike. They have difference in geographies and markets and what have you. You have to reflect that. So to be honest, you have to set your own measures and your own ambitions in where you want to get and kind of set that appetite. So I think it's the right balance between kind of self-defined benchmarks versus industry kind of comparisons, right? So I think it's a skill of a CISO and the leaders to ensure that there is the right kind of thinking injected in that topic.
Okay, thanks for that perspective. So we see there's a couple of questions that actually came in via the question panel. So one of the questions from Jasmine, who would like to know what the approximate percentage of time that you give to your SOC people for further training. So this is, I guess, a very good question that always comes up when you have an operation where you need to make sure everybody performs at the maximum level of efficiency, but how much time does a person in a SOC get to train himself or herself in this sort of environment? So I don't know, Matt, do you have any sort of numbers or ideas on this perspective?
So at a high level, I have two numbers, right? One is in general, I try to provide for 2 weeks of training per year per associate. By default, right? If they ask for more, I typically give it. I don't do it as a mandatory, hey, you have 2 weeks, you need to take them. It's just, hey, what classes are you interested in at a high level to get educated on, unless there's something specific we need to guide them to. And those would be, hey, I've totally unplugged. I'm not focusing anything on work for the next week. And then you can totally focus on that. So that's one hard metric there. And the other softer metric is, take time throughout the day, right? I don't mandate it. We don't tell what that percentage should be. The nature of security is some days are good days, AKA, not many alerts and kind of calm, and other days are a bit of a storm. So in those quieter times, obviously we do a lot of threat hunting, but there's also balancing work within the team. So say, you know what, I'm going to go study for this thing, right? I'm going to spend a couple hours here this week, a couple hours there. So it's very free form. In our organization, we treat everybody like an owner. It says manage your own time. We don't really micromanage. So it's a little bit more free form. So with that, how many more weeks could that be over the year? I don't know, 10% of your time, because any amount that you spend actually studying within the field is of a value to the company. So I don't really consider it quote unquote training time. It's just a different form of contributing to their personal growth and the security of the organization.
Yeah, so it probably depends on your environment, but in general, does the training consist of the main motivational aspect of people, or is it more the collaboration, or what is the main motivational driver for a SOC environment, a SOC leader?
I guess I missed the motivation to get training, or the motivation.
Does the training provide the main motivational aspect of a SOC analyst? So having that ability of 10% of his time to actually gets to increase the capabilities and knowledge, is that really important?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so again, you can get heads down as a SOC analyst and just constantly going through alerts and doing your day to day. And if you don't take time to put your head up and breathe and focus on the things that you need for personal growth and career growth, then, you would go off to another organization really quick. You don't want to be in a call center like environment for that, with no opportunity to get some upward mobility. So,
okay. So there's another question that came in. Would you consider giving ITIL version 4 foundation training to everyone as a gold standard for service management? Adam, do you want to take that first?
Sure. I'm just going to mention quickly the percentage of time and for people development. So kind of coming back to Matt's answer as well. I think my point is I really like the concept of having a kind of an easier day, but depending on the organization, you may just not have it. And then how do you operate? How do you provide for that time in an environment which constantly gets hit, and kind of the number of alerts and alarms and kind of events that you have to investigate just increases day by day, right? So I like to inject that kind of sometimes rigor of spending 20% time on general on-the-job development, which is effectively 1 day a week. You off the regular kind of alarm duties, right, and kind of regular work, and all you do is kind of study, investigate, and kind of deepening your knowledge yourself, right, and doing that. And on top of that, you obviously have the formal training courses, and those actually help. Not a lot of people, in my opinion, really values those sort of formal training, but these are also the easiest way how to get the CPE points for all sorts of certifications that come and that require that kind of collection of those continuous kind of education programs, right? So that's useful. So that's to kind of answer, how to manage the on-the-job development, because you have to study to be able to, and you have to develop yourself in order to address the new threats that may actually come in a day, in a week, or in a month, right? Which may not really be possible to kind of study for in a formal way, kind of often enough, I guess. So it's always that kind of constant improvements. Coming back to the ITIL version 4 foundation training, I think it may be useful. I don't think the full service management training is really needed for people, and I think you have to kind of carefully judge which elements to introduce. So I think in terms of like incident and problem management being, the typical kind of two that I would concentrate on those probably a little bit more than maybe some other elements of ITIL, because they're kind of more or closer to the actual type of operations that SOC does, right? Because it is actually working on incidents and kind of solving problems, kind of longer term solutions, right? So probably more than, change management, capacity management. I mean, they're all interesting, and I think there is the right time to introduce the rest of it. But, as a first cut, I would introduce incident management and problem management, because that will help the workforce to gain those kind of professionalism in the way how they respond and act.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think one thing I would add for some of the trainings is say, hey, to give training, I think there's a difference between giving and offering, and I try to strike a balance between that. The given or mandated training are things that are absolutely key for the organization. Specific around incident response, I think is great. But it's also important to have offered a bunch of training out there. And really what I use that is as a bellwether to gauge an individual's interest in future career passions. If we have a whole bunch of training opportunities available, but the individual doesn't avail themselves of those opportunities, to me, that speaks to their own internal motivations. So you can't I can lead the horse to water, but I can't make it drink. You can, but you don't want to beat that horse too much. So again, it indicates that, hey, you are interested in passion and growing, you're eating up all these opportunities, and that's what I would look for in a SOC lead. So,
okay, thanks, Matt. So let's make sure you guys all stay awake. So we'll launch a second poll. Hopefully this will pop up any second. Here it goes. So which skills do you think are most important for an SOC analyst? So please choose between attack knowledge, threat identification, alert triaging, or the response procedures. So while you fill out this poll, please feel free to also post your questions in the chat panels, and we'll try to pick them up as frequently as possible. So I'll wait another minute for you to make your selection between attack knowledge, threat identification, alert triaging, and response procedures. Okay, let's see what the results are. So 42% think that the most important skill set is to identify threats or have the ability to identify threats. Second is to know how to react to them. Third is how to triage the alerts. And the last one is the actual details on the attack. So quite interesting. Most of you think that the threat identification is the most important skill. So thanks for participating in that. This actually brings us to the topic on a more operational and how to deal with maybe repetitive tasks. As we know, the more information gets aggregated in a SOC, the more details are available, and the more alert fatigue might exist, where people just overlook important aspects of the identification. So how do you deal with that, Matt? What do you do in order to overcome this problem where there's just too much information that doesn't make it relevant anymore?
Yeah, I mean, alert fatigue is a real thing. Unbeknownst to my team, I belong to multiple email distribution lists so that I can just kind of keep a pulse on what's going on. And actually, it was just last week, I found some alerts that were firing for some network resources coming through, just spamming my inbox. And, my response to the team was, "Is everything okay?" They're like, "Yeah, everything's fine. What are you talking about?" And it turns out that the team had seen so many of these alerts that they had moved them to a different inbox in their email. So they were just kind of ignoring them because it's, "Hey, it's false positive. Let's not worry about it." But in this case, they were legitimate concerns. It's just they had filtered them out. So it does happen, right? And it is a real thing. So to really address those, you have to take a level of ownership on them and get to the root cause of the alert, right? Hey, look, this system is exhibiting high CPU. Well, why, right? Is it properly tuned? Do you have the right thresholds in place? Are you alerting the right people? Are they taking action on the alerts once you have raised them up? Or are they just closing and saying that's normal and dropping it and not taking that actual issue from the beginning all the way to the end and closing the loop and getting the documentation and fixing it? In addition to that, you should always be looking for automation capabilities, right? Okay, if this is a legitimate alert, what needs to happen? Is there a way that you can automate that? Are there products in the marketplace out there that can automate and respond to that? Phishing emails, for example, there's lots of technology out there to make that process faster. And then, of course, kind of getting down to it and saying, okay, do I really need this information? Yes, it's a legitimate alert, but what does it mean? And aggregate that with other data from other log sources to understand, is this a true actionable alert, or should we move this to informational to really reduce that noise? Because again, exactly to your point, right? Alert fatigue, if people are just expecting lots of alerts, you're going to miss legitimate things that go through in that traffic. So definitely something to be concerned about.
Thanks, Matt. So, Adam, there's a tremendous amount of discussion in the industry around automation and how to make the response and the alert triaging and the identification of incidents as a automated process as possible. Can you talk to us a little bit about that automation aspect, how important it is, and how the SOC leaders and analysts should look at automation for them?
Sure. I think it actually greatly connects to the previous question about how to prevent alert fatigue or how to manage that, right? And automation is partially the answer of it. So taking the tedious tasks away and this kind of soul destroying tasks, of literally very repetitive tasks that can be actually automated, to be done with some sort of process automation and general sort of using the computers to do a lot of, I guess, data enrichment and matching and kind of creating cases together. So the actual analyst can actually spend time on stuff which is more tuned towards human brain or human, the kind of the what our brains are programmed for, which is pattern recognition with a lot of different variables and different environments. So not the exact matching like what the computer is great for, or doing a lot of calculations, but more of a pattern recognition and kind of trying to find shortcuts and deriving for to conclusions quite quickly based on this pattern recognition. That's the interesting work. That's the investigative work where I think the analysts enjoy it the most, and it's very likely not causing actually analysts to find false positives, but in fact the real incidents, right? So that's actually why you want to inject a lot of automation in those tedious tasks and this enrichment and wherever you can, so people in your SOC can do what's interesting and what's most valuable. And then you get that kind of the top level of efficiency and the kind of the overall value of your SOC environment. I think also when you're dealing with such a vast lake of alerts, because that's what we arriving at, right? That's the situation for pretty much any sizable organization, is how to deprioritize. So not so much how to prioritize, but what to comfortably put aside. And that's very often a lot more difficult choice than what to investigate. So, part of the key to that is, I think, a good definition of use cases, and I'm not really sure whether we covering it sort of further in this session, but certainly later on in our All SOC Masterclass program. I think, there should be an emphasis on declaring and kind of working with your use cases a lot more and a lot more efficient in order to have more the natural spread between those cases worth investigating versus cases which are just the noise, right? I mean, there may be kind of legitimate alerts, but that's not where your analyst time is needing to be invested compared to some other more important stuff, right? So that's kind of my.
So Adam, you're kind of like answering this question by pointing to some more technology capabilities of machine learning, artificial intelligence, and at the same time finding ways to process the information in a more automated way. So I think the combination of it is probably interesting. Will that lead to the point where at some point in the future we don't need any people anymore in order to staff a SOC? Matt, what do you think?
Machine versus machine, or AI versus AI in the future? No, I mean, I think there's always going to be a human element. They're just, and I may be wrong, right? 10 years, 20 years from now, somebody's going to come back and say, Matt, you predicted there'd still be humans there, and there's not. I do think there will be, right? Humans are just more creative. Machines are good at what they do right now, analyzing patterns, but they have to bring the alert up, because there still is stuff they can get through that, you can't correlate properly, right? The machine doesn't have all the data, and the experience of SOC analysts can be the difference to having a good day or a bad day, I think, in many cases. But we will continue to see more and more machine learning tools that give us more visibility, because the attackers are definitely using them. So we need to use them as well. But again, humans, I think, are an essential piece. Because the more you free up time for your humans right now, because again, we're having trouble finding those people, the more time they have to proactively go out and do threat hunting and look at other things and get away from these monotonous things that we can use machine learning for, right? I say abnormal account activity detected on this individual, right? Something that would have taken a SOC analyst hours or days to research before. The machine, if you have the right log correlations and metrics being put into it, the AI can detect that rapidly, right? And then that frees time up for the SOC analyst to go look at other up and coming future threats. I think a lot of times, and one thing I think everybody can be guilty of on occasion, is we get so focused on the now, right? The active alerts that are coming in that we have to respond to on a daily basis. And you don't have enough time to lift your head up and look down the road and see what may or may not be coming. So you always got to be, cognizant of that, what's coming up in the future. And if you know that, hey, there's a truck barreling down the road towards me, you have time to get out of the way or do something, right? And if you could see it farther down the road, then you have more times to build bigger defenses, build a side road or whatever. But yeah, we need time to lift your heads up. And I think machine learning, AI gives us that.
I would like to add something to it, because, I like to do some sort of down-to-earth comparisons between our industry and maybe some other industries that have gone through that process of introducing automatization. So think about vehicle manufacturing. You look at the plants now, right? I mean, they all highly sophisticated, operated mostly by robots, and there is a great level of automation just in that industry alone, also others. But is there still human beings around the factory? Yes, they no longer carrying the spares because there is an automated belts supplying that, right? But there's still people who basically tune the whole process, understand how the welds have to be made, can go around and inspect whether the robot actually does its job properly, and kind of tweak and tune the system. And I think the SOC jobs will evolve into more of a, being able to operate that automation and control that automation and define that automation, rather than actually trying to outdo computer in just sheer volume of calculations, right? Which will probably never will be able to catch up anymore, right? So I think that's the kind of thinking that we have to inject there. So not that the jobs at the SOC are over, they're going to be slightly changing towards more of that kind of new, the master of machines, I would say, type, right? So were quite a philosophical questions, really.
Yeah, I can see that we're getting off track a little bit here, but so let's get back to, I think, Eric Brooks, you brought up this question just when we started to talk about automation, which is, what are the first sort of opportunities for automation? What are the first use cases or applications that can be automated? So, Matt, do you have some automation already implemented?
Yeah, well, we have a fair amount of automation, of course, implemented. I won't go into specifics of it, but I think some of the ones that you'd want to look for them are, okay, what do you know that could happen on a daily basis that you have people responding to all the time? So one activity that most SOC analysts or security professionals will find themselves doing is putting a permanent block or a temporary block on an IP address that's doing bad things to you, right? So look at that process. How do you make that decision? You can build that decision into a level of automation and just have it happen automatically, right? So instantly, you go from, hey, I used to get this alert, and you waited a couple of minutes for the SOC analyst to respond. They would analyze something, take another couple of minutes, block the IP another couple of minutes. And so you take something that may have taken 15 minutes, and now it's near instantaneous once everything satisfies all those conditions. I think that's one great opportunity. Account locking or account suspension is also another opportunity for you, depending upon your industry and what you do and the log sources you ingest. Again, this is more than just, hey, I see X number of logins. It's like, hey, I see a login from this location that doesn't make sense. I see this level of activity that doesn't make sense, and then it falls out of the user's normal time zone, right? You can pull 3 logs and aggregate them together into one actionable event, and you can automate that process. And really, it comes down to, what are you seeing in your SOC? I think everybody should have an individual look at their own situation and say, here are the alerts that we're seeing on a daily basis, and look at them and look at what your SOC is doing and say, okay, they're spending 40% of their time doing this, and then focus on that at automation. Again, we should spend more time at a risk level focus, saying, okay, where is my biggest risk? Where do I need to put my resources? Are you getting hit a lot at some and not every company is the same. We have different assets, different risk postures. And that's really where you should put the focus on automation, not just pick one because it's easy when that's like 2% of what your SOC does, right? Focus on where they're getting most of their time spent.
So I see we have about 10 minutes left, and we have tons of more questions. But let's just maybe focus on one or two that could be quite interesting. So when you're a SOC leader and operating a SOC, you certainly have to deal with the staff and the analysts and make sure you find the right people, you motivate them, you train them. But a lot of it is also to provide justification for the investment of the SOC, so kind of like managing upwards. What sort of challenges have you seen as a SOC operator in providing information to the upper management about what the SOC does, how effective it is, and so forth? So, Matt, do you have some stories to share?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, right? When you look at a base level of the SOC and their metrics, right, you're going to see, hey, these are the number of alerts we had, these are the number of real incidents, these were false positives, here's what we've tuned, Here's our mean time to respond, mean time to detect, mean time to resolve, all these different metrics, right? And at different levels of management, they have different values. So the SOC lead is going to look at the very detailed metrics. But when you get up to the board, these aren't really metrics you can share with them. It's just they're confused. They're looking for more very high level stuff. And so that's something that I think we always, or at least I always struggle with, trying to find a balance between reporting and trying to make sure that it is clear enough and yet not too far into the weeds. And instead, what we focus on at a higher level is risk posture, right? It's like, okay, here's where we have risk. Here's the actions we're taking to resolve the risk, supported with a few underlying metrics. And here's the residual risk that remains and the steps that we're taking to kind of work on those. So it's much more strategic at that level. But when you're at a base level SOC, it's how fast can you respond to things, how fast can you detect things, and then remediate those based on that. And if you want, you can also dive into if you've performed a BIA across your business impact analysis across your organization, and you can tie your particular security incidents to cost, right? You can say, hey, we had a security incident and it cost us X. And then you can use that as a metric to track your organization and say, hey, we're always going to have security incidents, but on average, here's how much they're costing because we're able to respond and remediate faster. And that's, again, tying that back to specific risks. And then depending upon your level of BIA, you can tie those not back just to your overall general production, but to specific systems, right? I know this system, if it's down, it's going to cost me X per hour. Of estimated cost, and you can tie that back and report on that and say, here's how much money we lost in this year based on security incidents, and track that over time.
Thanks, Matt. Adam, what's your take on this?
It's a lovely topic because I failed so many times there, right? There's plenty of battle scars on my back. If you want, as a CISO, to be led in a completely different way and you're generally quite sound security strategy to be destroyed, take a 100-page long detailed technical report to a board session, right? Those board members will make sure that your life is disrupted and the life of your people, and you're going to be directed towards delivering some answers that never really needed to be answered, and your effort to be spent on something which is completely useless, right? Because effectively you're subjected to the decision making and leadership of people who are not actually the experts. You should be. So I think I absolutely agree with Matt on the fact that you have to tune your reporting and the depth of the reporting and the focus depending on your audience. Because it's different when you're debriefing your IT management community, which is quite technical and maybe actually interested in technical levels. But at a higher level of management, it's the risk that counts, right? And usually there is discussions. Obviously, in those probably more mature environments, there is a lot of boards of directors which love to dive into details, but there is a risk in that. And I've just explained that, right? That may actually derail your strategy and actually kind of be counter effective, I guess, to what you're trying to achieve. So I think sometimes you have to actually shield the board from the technical details and focus on the risk. And as Matt said, focus on the money, right? It's the always best strategy to deploy if you don't have any other alternatives. Just focus on big ticket items, your most important assets, where the money flows in the biggest kind of volume. These are always going to be the right strategies towards, effectively protection and making your organization more resilient.
Great, thanks, Adam. So we have another 5 minutes left. So let's launch our last poll, which is a bit of a similar question as we had before, but instead of the analyst, it's like the SOC leader, so the ones who actually manage the SOC. What are the skills that you think are the most important for the SOC managers? Is it their technical expertise? Is it their knowledge on how to manage people? Is it their ability to do coaching and training? Or is it the optimization of the procedures as part of their task? So what do you think is the most important? Please choose one. Is it the technical expertise? Is it the knowledge on how to manage people? Is it the coaching and the training capabilities, or is it the ways to operate the procedures more efficiently? So let's let everybody answer that for another minute or so. Okay, so in fact, we only have a couple of minutes left, so let's see what the results are. So first is the people management is the most important according to the poll. Knowing how to optimize the procedures in the SOC adds a lot of value to you guys. The technical expertise is third, and the coaching and training is last. I guess that can mostly be outsourced. So thanks for participating in that poll. That was quite interesting. So I guess we have one more question left, and I'd like to bring this in the perspective of what we live or what we've lived over the last year and a half with the pandemic. Has the last year and a half changed the sort of approach to your SOC analysts, the way that they need to work, the way that they need to collaborate? So, Matt, how did you live those last year and a half in a very difficult environment to provide a 24/7 operation?
Yeah, I think, it's been challenging for everybody. Our company, like many others, we found ourselves, going home and working remotely. The beauty behind that is IT in general, at least our organization, has been working collaboratively across multiple locations for many years, right? Not only locations in the United States, but also locations overseas, in Israel and India, to really provide that 24, kind of by 7 SOC capability. So we had the tools in place, already leveraged those tools. And we were comfortable with it. So outside of kind of changing a seating position, for the most part, we were able to execute quite well. I think the we saw a good positive from that is I think there has been an increased level of collaboration and team building with people that were not sitting in one location. It's like before we would have, if you weren't in the headquarters, sometimes you didn't have the same conversations that other people would have because you're in the office and we chatted back and forth across the desk. But once the playing field was leveled equal and everybody had to use the same level of collaboration tools, everybody was also able to collaborate on a more equal footing. And so I think that improved collaboration. There's some challenges and perhaps some team building that we used to be able to do in the office. But overall, I think we responded quite well. We're in a good position.
Adam, I know you've been sick the last 10 days. So what have you seen over the last year and a half on the way that we actually operate SOCs?
So I think it's Matt's observations are absolutely valid. I think for everyone in the industry, I think the most challenging out of probably about a year and a half was the change of pattern of working, right? So not many organizations before actually, embraced and fully implemented remote working. So partial maybe, but especially within the SOCs where, you have the kind of the Houston control center monitors on the wall, that's very difficult to recreate in people's homes effectively. So that's the kind of challenge. But also, as Matt said, it's the human to human interaction. There is no coffee machine breaks and the kind of the quick check, just by, speaking to someone on the side. Have you seen this? Have you seen that? Well, how about this? And maybe someone else overhearing it and actually being able to add very quickly. That is unfortunately the cost of, being remote. But I think there is also great benefits, which is that we can actually have staff being based anywhere, participating in our SOC operations and not being bound to any particular physical location. So it was a kind of a game of, I guess, reinforcing the fact that we can work remotely and we can do it in a sustainable way. And we just need to manage very carefully, the challenges that we have.
Okay, thanks, Matt. We're at Adam, sorry. We're at the end of our hour. So I'd like to thank both panelists, Adam and Matt, for their insight. Hopefully, you have a bit of a better understanding what is important to look for in your SOC leaders. I will hand over to the next session, which will talk about how to actually build a modern SOC. So it was a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for participating and your questions. Hopefully we answered most of them. If not, please feel free to just send any of us your questions and we'll be following up on them directly. So thanks very much and have a good rest of the SOC Masterclass.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.